Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, fellow history lovers and connoisseurs of ancient craftsmanship. Ever wonder who actually wrote down all of history? It wasn't always the kings or the generals. More often, it was the humble scribe, a silent architect of civilization. Their world revolved around a set of incredible specialized tools. This series, Ink and Quill, Ancient Scribes' Forgotten Daily Tools, is your all-access pass into that world. We're going to uncover the instruments that shaped the written word for thousands of years, from the simplest stylus scratching on clay to the most elegant brush painting characters on silk. Join us as we explore the ingenuity behind these forgotten tools and reveal the daily life of the people who wielded them. It's a fascinating glimpse into the meticulous craft that preserved history itself. Make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our journey back in time. Have you ever wondered what it was like to write the first words? Not with a pen, not with a keyboard, but with the tools that captured human thought for the very first time. Our adventure begins in the ancient cradle of civilization, Mesopotamia, with a tool that looks deceptively simple, but changed the world forever, the cuneiform stylus. Picture this. You're in a bustling Sumerian city thousands of years ago. The air is warm, and you're holding a small, carefully cut piece of reed. It's not just a plant. It's your key to immortality, your instrument for recording laws, stories, and the transactions of a thriving society. This is the stylus. Now, imagine a fresh, damp tablet of clay in your other hand, cool and impressionable. With a practiced movement, you press the corner of the reed into the soft clay. It doesn't glide like a pen. It makes a distinct impression, a wedge shape that gives this writing system its name, cuneiform, from the Latin cuneus for wedge. The genius of the stylus was its versatility. It wasn't just one tool, but a whole toolkit in one. Scribes, the highly respected intellectuals of their time, would have several stili, each with a different purpose. A pointed tip might be used to draw the early pictographic signs, sketching the outline of a head or a stalk of barley. But as writing evolved and became more abstract, the design of the stylus changed with it. The most common type had a triangular or squared-off end. By tilting the stylus at different angles and pressing it into the clay, a scribe could create a whole vocabulary of wedge-shaped marks. A vertical wedge, a horizontal one, a diagonal one each press was a deliberate, skillful act. Holding it wasn't like holding a modern pen. You would grip it in your fist, pressing down with your thumb to apply steady pressure. It was a physical process, a craft. Think of it like a sculptor carving a miniature relief. Each symbol was a combination of these wedge-shaped imprints. A single sign representing a word or a syllable might require half a dozen precise movements. Scribes had to learn hundreds of these signs, and their ability to wield the stylus with speed and accuracy was a mark of their education and status. They were the original information technologists, the keepers of knowledge. The materials for these stili varied. The most common and accessible was the giant reed Asterisk Arundo Donax asterisk, which grew abundantly along the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Scribes would cut a section, let it dry, and then carefully shape the end into the required wedge. But for more prestigious work, or for wealthier scribes, stili could also be crafted from bone or ivory. There's even evidence of metal stili, perhaps made of bronze, which would have been more durable and created even sharper, cleaner impressions in the clay. Each material offered a slightly different feel, a different connection between the writer's hand and the written word. Let's pause and really appreciate what this simple tool accomplished. Before the stylus, memories were fleeting and history was oral, passed down from generation to generation and subject to change with every telling. But with the stylus and clay tablet, thoughts, laws, poems, and king lists could be made permanent. An administrative record of grain distribution, a royal decree, or a legal contract could outlast the people who created it. The epic tale of Gilgamesh, one of the earliest surviving works of literature, owes its existence to scribes methodically pressing their stelae into clay, tablet by tablet. This unassuming reed, this small piece of bone, was the technology that allowed human civilization to build a collective memory. It transformed abstract ideas in the human mind into tangible, enduring records that we can still read and understand today. It literally shaped the first words of history. So the next time you effortlessly type a message or jot down a note, take a moment to remember the cuneiform stylus and the ancient scribes of Mesopotamia. Remember the patient, deliberate act of pressing wedge after wedge into soft clay, and the revolutionary power held within that simple, elegant tool. It's the ancestor of every pen, pencil, and keyboard we use today. Last time, we talked about the incredible cuneiform stylus, the pen of ancient Mesopotamia. But what good is a pen without paper? Today, we're diving into the other half of this amazing duo, the clay tablet. This wasn't just any mud pie. This was the very foundation of writing, the enduring pages of the earth. So, how did they turn a lump of clay into a surface ready for the world's first literature? It was a craft, a meticulous process that began long before any scribe made a single mark. Imagine a skilled artisan by the banks of the Tigris or Euphrates. They would carefully select the right kind of clay, free from stones and grit. Then came the hard work, kneading it over and over, like a baker preparing dough. They'd fold it, press it, and work out every single air bubble. Why? Because a single air pocket could cause the tablet to crack or even explode when it was fired. The goal was to create a perfectly smooth, uniform consistency. Once the clay was perfectly prepared, it was shaped. This is where the versatility of clay really shines. Scribes weren't limited to one standard size. They created tablets for every conceivable purpose. You might have a tiny, palm-sized tablet that was essentially a receipt for a few jars of beer. These were the post-it notes of the ancient world, quick records of daily transactions. Then you had school tablets, often round or lentil-shaped, where students would practice their signs, pressing the stylus in, and smoothing the clay over to try again. It was a reusable, erasable whiteboard, thousands of years ahead of its time. But then you have the truly breathtaking pieces. Imagine massive multi-column tablets, some as large as a modern laptop screen. These weren't for grocery lists. These were the grand libraries, the encyclopedias of their time. They held epic poems like the Epic of Gilgamesh, detailed law codes like the Code of Hammurabi, complex astronomical observations, and intricate medical texts. Some literary works were so long they spanned multiple tablets, creating a series, like chapters in a book. The shape told a story even before the writing did, small and square for business, large and rectangular for history. Now, let's transport ourselves to a scribe's workshop. The air is cool and damp to keep the clay workable. The freshly shaped tablet sits on a wooden board, its surface moist and gleaming. The scribe picks up their reed stylus. Listen closely. Can you hear it? That gentle, satisfying squelch as the triangular tip presses into the soft clay. It's a rhythmic, focused sound. Each wedge-shaped mark is made with a deliberate push and a slight turn of the wrist. The scribe moves across the surface, their hand gliding just above the clay, careful not to smudge the pristine work. It's a dance of precision. There's no backspace key, no delete button. While a mistake on a wet tablet could be smoothed over, it was a mark of a master scribe to produce a clean, error-free text on the first try. Once the writing was complete, the tablet faced a crucial decision: to be temporary or permanent. For everyday records, like those beer receipts or school exercises, the tablet might simply be left to dry in the sun. Sun-dried tablets were durable enough for short-term use, and if the information was no longer needed, the tablet could be soaked in water and recycled. The clay could be kneaded and reformed, ready for a new message. This was sustainability in its most ancient form. Nothing was wasted. But for the important stuff, the laws, the religious texts, the royal decrees, the epic stories sun-drying wasn't enough. These needed to last for eternity. For this, the tablets went into the kiln. Imagine them being carefully stacked in a brick oven. The fire would be lit, and the temperature would slowly rise. As the heat intensified, the water baked out of the clay, and a chemical transformation occurred. The soft, pliable mud turned into hard, durable ceramic. You can almost hear the faint crackle as the last bits of moisture escape. When they emerged from the cooled kiln, they were no longer just mud. They were stone. They were fireproof, water-resistant, and incredibly difficult to destroy. It's this final step, the firing, that is the reason we know so much about these ancient civilizations. When palaces and libraries burned down in ancient wars events, it would have destroyed papyrus scrolls or parchment. The flames only served to bake the clay tablets even harder. Invading armies, in their quest to destroy a city's knowledge, ironically preserved it forever. It's one of history's greatest accidents. These humble pieces of earth, dug from the riverbank, became the most enduring libraries the world has ever known. They have survived for over 5,000 years, outlasting empires and carrying the voices of the Mesopotamians directly to us. Think about that. The story of Gilgamesh's quest for immortality, the laws that govern society, the letters between kings, the astronomical charts that mapped the heavens, all of it survives because of this simple, brilliant choice of clay as a medium. It is a powerful testament to the ingenuity of these ancient people and the incredible longevity of their chosen material. From a simple squelch of a stylus in mud to a library that can withstand fire and time, the clay tablet is one of the most important inventions in human history. All right, let's journey from the solid world of styluses to the flowing grace of ancient Egypt. Picture this. You're sitting by the Nile, a gentle breeze rustling the papyrus reeds. In your hand, you hold not a heavy clay tablet, but a light, elegant tool, the Egyptian reed brush. This wasn't just any stick. It was a carefully prepared instrument, a thin reed, perhaps a asterisk Joncus maritimus asterisk, the sea rush. Imagine an ancient scribe taking this reed and meticulously chewing one end, or perhaps making a series of precise cuts, fraying it just so. What they created was a brush capable of incredible versatility. It could sweep across the papyrus in a broad, bold stroke to outline a figure, and then, with a delicate twist of the wrist, it could render the most intricate details of a hieroglyph. Listen closely. Can you hear it? It's not the harsh scratch of a stylus on clay. It's a soft, whispering sound, the sound of fibrous bristles gliding over the smooth surface of a papyrus sheet. It's the sound of creation, the sound of stories, laws, and sacred texts flowing from ink to paper. This gentle swish is the soundtrack to an entire civilization's knowledge. With this brush, the Egyptians brought their world to life. They developed not just one, but multiple forms of writing. There were the iconic hieroglyphs, the beautiful and complex picture signs you see carved on temple walls. Each one was a miniature work of art. Think of the symbol for water, a zigzag line. With a reed brush, a scribe could give it a sense of movement, of actual flowing water. Or the symbol of an owl, representing the M sound. The scribe could capture the curve of its beak and the intensity of its gaze with just a few expert strokes. But hieroglyphs were slow and laborious, reserved for monumental inscriptions and sacred texts. For everyday life, for letters, for legal documents, for accounting, they needed something faster. So, using the very same reed brush, they developed hieratic script. This was a cursive, simplified version of hieroglyphs. The owl was no longer a detailed drawing, but a quick, flowing shape, recognizable yet efficient. Imagine a scribe rapidly taking notes, their hand dancing across the papyrus, the reed brush flicking and turning, transforming complex pictures into swift, elegant lines. Hieratic was the handwriting of ancient Egypt, and the reed brush was its perfect partner. Mastering this tool was no small feat. It took years of dedicated practice. A young scribe would start by learning to prepare the brush itself, getting the frayed end to the perfect consistency, not too stiff, not too soft. They had to learn how to hold it just the right angle to control the thickness of the line. A slight pressure change could mean the difference between a thick, assertive stroke and a hairline-thin detail. And then came the ink. Scribes would mix their own, typically using soot scraped from cooking pots, mixed with a binder like gum arabic and a little water. They would dip the brush, not too much, not too little, just enough to load the fibers with rich, black ink. Maintaining that perfect fine point on the brush while it was saturated with ink was a skill in itself. A worn or splayed brush would ruin the delicate forms of the script. This required constant maintenance and a deep understanding of their materials. Think about the thousands of signs they had to memorize. For a formal scribe, this wasn't just about writing letters. It was about drawing a universe of symbols. Each sign had to be consistent, legible, and aesthetically pleasing. Their reed brush was an extension of their mind and hand, translating thoughts into tangible, beautiful forms. This wasn't just writing. It was a blend of calligraphy and illustration. The scribe was as much an artist as they were a writer. The same brush used to tally grain sacks could also be used to illustrate the Book of the Dead, depicting gods and goddesses with incredible detail and vibrancy. On a single scroll, you could find neat columns of hieratic text alongside stunning, full-color illustrations of the afterlife, all created with the same humble tool. The reed brush seamlessly blended the act of recording information with the art of visual storytelling. So, when we look at an ancient Egyptian papyrus, we're not just seeing old writing. We are seeing the result of incredible skill and artistry. We are witnessing the legacy of a simple reed, transformed by human ingenuity into an instrument that could capture both the mundane details of daily life and the most profound beliefs of a magnificent civilization. The soft whisper of that brush on papyrus echoed for 3,000 years, carrying the voice of ancient Egypt through the millennia, all the way to us. Now we're journeying back in time to the banks of the mighty Nile to uncover the story of one of ancient Egypt's greatest innovations, papyrus. You've probably heard the word, maybe even seen pictures of it in museums, but what exactly is it, and why was it so revolutionary? Forget heavy clay tablets or cumbersome stone walls. Papyrus was the ancient world's answer to lightweight, portable paper, and it completely changed the game for communication and record keeping. So, let's start at the source. The story of papyrus begins with a humble plant, Cyperus papyrus, a tall reed that grew in abundance in the marshy delta of the Nile River. To the ancient Egyptians, this plant wasn't just a weed. It was a divine gift, a resource that provided material for everything from boats and sandals to, most importantly, their primary writing surface. They saw the Nile as the source of all life, and this versatile plant was one of its most precious offerings. Now, how do you turn a marsh weed into a smooth, flexible sheet you can write on? It's a process that's both ingenious and incredibly labor-intensive. Imagine an ancient Egyptian artisan standing waist-deep in the cool waters of the Nile, carefully harvesting these long, triangular stalks. The first step was to peel away the tough outer green rind, revealing the soft, white pith inside. This pith was the real treasure. Next, they would slice this pith into very thin, long strips. Think of it like peeling a vegetable, but with incredible precision. The quality of the final sheet depended heavily on how thin and uniform these strips were. Once they had a good pile of these delicate ribbons, the real magic began. They would lay a row of strips vertically on a hard, wet surface, making sure the edges slightly overlapped. Then, they'd place another layer on top, but this time horizontally, creating a cross-thatched grid. It's this perpendicular grain that gave the finished papyrus its distinctive look and strength. But a grid of wet plant strips isn't paper yet. The next stage was crucial: pressure. The layered mat was hammered or pressed under a heavy weight for several days. The natural sticky sap of the papyrus plant itself acted as a glue, bonding the strips together as they dried under the hot Egyptian sun. No external adhesive was needed. The plant fused with itself. This process flattened the sheet, squeezed out the excess water, and melded the individual strips into a single, cohesive surface. After drying, the sheet was still a bit rough. To create the perfect canvas for a scribe's reed pen, it needed to be polished. Workers would burnish the surface with a smooth stone, a piece of ivory or a shell, rubbing it back and forth until it was smooth and ready to accept ink without it bleeding or smudging. The result was a beautiful, pale, lightweight, and surprisingly durable sheet. It was strong, yet flexible enough to be rolled. Of course, a single sheet wasn't always enough. For longer documents like religious texts, administrative records, or literary works, scribes needed more space. So these individual sheets were glued together, end to end, using a simple flour paste. They could create scrolls of incredible length. Some of the longest surviving papyrus scrolls, like the Great Harris Papyrus, are over 40 meters. That's more than 130 feet long. Imagine unrolling a document that long today. These scrolls could then be rolled up, tied with a string, and stored in a jar or a box, or easily transported by a messenger. Before papyrus, the Egyptians, like many other ancient cultures, carved hieroglyphs into stone or wrote on cumbersome clay tablets. Think about the limitations of that. You can't exactly pop a stone monument into a backpack. Record keeping was stationary and public. But papyrus changed everything. Suddenly, information became portable. A pharaoh's decree could be quickly written down and dispatched to the furthest corners of the kingdom. Temple accounts, tax records, and census data could be compiled, stored, and accessed with unprecedented ease. Archives could hold vast quantities of information in a relatively small space. A library of papyrus scrolls was infinitely more practical than a library of stone tablets. This portability also fueled a literary explosion. Stories, poems, medical texts, and mathematical treatises could be written, copied, and shared. Works like the Book of the Dead, which contained spells to guide the deceased in the afterlife, were commonly written on papyrus and placed in tombs. It allowed for the creation of a rich, complex literary culture that could be passed down through generations. Scribes, the masters of this technology, became some of the most respected and powerful people in Egyptian society. They were the gatekeepers of knowledge. Imagine the sound, the soft, dry rustle of a papyrus scroll being unfurled by a scribe in a sunlit temple courtyard. That sound is the sound of history being recorded, of stories being told, of an entire civilization documenting its existence for eternity. Papyrus wasn't just paper. It was the engine of Egyptian bureaucracy, the vessel of its literature, and the carrier of its legacy. It was a technology so successful that it remained in use for thousands of years, not just in Egypt, but across the entire Mediterranean world by the Greeks and the Romans until it was eventually replaced by parchment and much later paper. So the next time you see a fragment of ancient papyrus with its beautiful, intricate script, take a moment to appreciate the incredible journey it represents. From a humble reed in the Nile to a sophisticated tool of empire, papyrus is a true testament to ancient Egyptian ingenuity. It was, in every sense, the gift of the Nile, a gift that allowed the voices of the past to echo into our present. Ever wondered how ancient civilizations made their mark on history? It wasn't just with grand monuments, but with something far more personal and powerful: ink. A scribe without ink is like a painter without paint, and trust me, making ancient ink was a true art form. Let's journey back in time and peek into an ancient Egyptian or Roman scribe's toolkit. Forget your fancy fountain pens and plastic ink cartridges. Picture this: a simple inkwell, maybe carved from wood, or perhaps molded from humble clay. It wouldn't be filled with liquid ink like we have today. Instead, you'd find solid cakes of pigment, almost like a modern watercolor set. The two most essential colors, the bread and butter of the ancient writing world, were black and red. The black ink was the workhorse, used for the main body of almost every text. Its source? Soot. Yes, the same stuff you might find in a chimney. Scribes would carefully collect soot, often by burning oils or resins under a cool surface. This carbon black was then mixed with a binder, something sticky like gum arabic, which comes from the sap of the acacia tree. This mixture was then pressed into a dry cake. Now, imagine the scribes starting their day. They'd take their reed brush, their pen, and dip it in a little water. Then, they would gently rub the wet brush against the solid black ink cake. Can you hear that soft, satisfying swish? It's the sound of history being brought to life. The water dissolves a small amount of the pigment and binder, creating a perfect, ready-to-use ink right on the spot. This method was incredibly practical. It was portable, it didn't spill, and the ink lasted forever. But what about the color red? Red was special. It wasn't for everyday writing. It was for emphasis. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of bolding or highlighting a word. Scribes used red ink for titles, headings, important religious names, or the first words of a new paragraph. This practice is actually where we get the term rubric from the Latin word rubrica, which means red ochre. This vibrant red pigment came directly from the earth. It was made from ground-up iron oxide, a mineral you know as rust, but found naturally as a clay called red ochre. Just like the black ink, this mineral powder was mixed with a binder and pressed into a cake. The process of using it was exactly the same. Dip a wet brush, mix on the palette, and write. The contrast between the stark black and the vivid red on a papyrus scroll or a piece of parchment is absolutely stunning, even thousands of years later. The chemistry behind these inks is fascinating. The black ink, being made of pure carbon, is incredibly stable. It doesn't fade in the light. It doesn't react with the air. That's why ancient manuscripts written with carbon ink are still perfectly legible today. It's one of the most permanent inks ever created. The red ochre is also exceptionally stable, as it's a mineral pigment. It holds its color beautifully over millennia. While black and red were the primary colors, they weren't the only ones. For more lavish or important manuscripts, especially religious texts or luxury editions of literature, scribes would occasionally use other colors. Blue, made from the expensive mineral azurite, or the even more precious lapis lazuli, might be used for a divine name. Green, created from malachite, could decorate a chapter heading. Yellow, from a mineral called orpiment, might add a splash of brightness. However, these other colors were much rarer. Not only were the minerals expensive and often imported from far away, but some of them were also less stable than carbon black or red ochre. Some mineral pigments could even react with each other, or with the writing surface over time. So, their use was reserved for very special occasions. These simple inkwells and pigment cakes were so much more than just tools. They were the bridge between the intangible world of thought, story, and law, and the physical, visible world. They were the technology that allowed ideas to travel across vast distances, and, more importantly, across the immense chasm of time. Every time a scribe mixed their ink, they weren't just preparing to write. They were performing a small act of magic, transforming fleeting words into something permanent and powerful. They were ensuring that their culture, their knowledge, and their stories would not be lost to the sands of time. It's truly incredible to think that these humble materials, soot, earth, and tree, sap held the key to immortality for an entire civilization's intellectual heritage. The next time you see an ancient manuscript in a museum, look closely at the ink. Appreciate the deep, rich black and the vibrant, earthy red. You're not just looking at old writing. You're looking at the very substance that carried human thought through the ages. So, how did people in ancient Greece and Rome jot down their thoughts, their to-do lists, or practice their ABCs? Well, they used this ingenious little device, the wax tablet. This is a tabula, as the Romans called it. It's essentially a small, shallow wooden tray filled with a layer of wax, usually darkened with soot or charcoal to make the writing stand out. And to write on it, you didn't use a pen. You used this, a stylus. Holds up a metal stylus, pointing out the sharp end and the flat end. This one's made of bronze, but they also used bone, ivory, or iron. One end is sharp, for scratching letters into the wax, and the other end? It's flat and spatulate. This was the eraser. When you were done with your notes or made a mistake, you just used the flat end to smooth the wax over, and voila! A clean slate, ready for your next big idea. Demonstrates writing a few letters into the wax, creating a scratching sound, then flips the stylus and smooths the wax over. Hear that? That crisp, scratching sound was the soundtrack of daily life in the classical world. Imagine a bustling Roman forum. You'd have merchants using these to calculate prices, officials taking quick notes during a meeting, and students in a classroom laboriously copying out their lessons. What made these so revolutionary was their reusability. Unlike expensive papyrus, which was reserved for important, permanent documents, wax tablets were the everyday workhorses of writing. They were perfect for drafts, for school exercises, for letters that didn't need to be kept forever. They were the ancient equivalent of a whiteboard or the Notes app on your phone. Personal, immediate, and incredibly practical. Think about it. A student could practice their handwriting over and over again on the same tablet, just by melting and smoothing the wax. A poet could draft and redraft a verse until it was perfect, without wasting a single sheet of precious papyrus. This ability to easily edit and erase changed how people interacted with the written word. It made writing a much more dynamic and fluid process. And they were portable. You could get small ones, called pugillaires, that could fit in your hand. Sometimes, 2 or more tablets were hinged together to form a diptych, or a polyptych, kind of like a little ancient notebook. They'd be tied shut with a leather cord to protect the writing inside. We found so many of these, from the ruins of Pompeii to Hadrian's Wall in Britain, often with messages still preserved after 2,000 years. These humble tools give us an amazing glimpse into the ordinary moments of the past. They weren't for grand histories or epic poems. They were for shopping lists, love notes, and homework. They show us that for the ancient Greeks and Romans, writing wasn't just for scholars and priests. It was a part of everyday life for many. The wax tablet and stylus put the power of the written word directly into the hands of the people. It's a simple technology, but its impact was absolutely massive. All right, let's step back into the ancient world. While your average Roman citizen might be scratching a quick note on a wax tablet when it came to the big stuff. The epic poems, the philosophical, treatises, the official decrees that shaped empires. There was only one material that truly mattered: papyrus. This wasn't just paper. It was the lifeblood of knowledge, the very foundation upon which the intellectual legacy of Greece and Rome was built. Imagine a bustling scriptorium, a dedicated workshop for copying books. It's not a quiet, hushed library like we think of today. Instead, it's a hive of activity. The air is filled with a low hum of voices and the constant, rhythmic sound of reed pens scratching across papyrus sheets. Hear that? It's the sound of history being written, quite literally. These professional scribes were the unsung heroes of the ancient literary world. Many were highly educated slaves or freedmen, their hands calloused from years of meticulous work. Their job was incredibly demanding. They had to have a steady hand, a keen eye, and an unwavering focus to copy texts for hours on end, often from a reader dictating the words aloud. Think about the process. A scribe would sit, likely cross-legged, with a fresh roll of papyrus across their lap. In one hand, a reed pen, or calamus, sharpened to a fine point. In the other, a small pot of ink, typically a dark, rich mixture made from soot, gum, and water. With painstaking care, they would dip the pen and begin to write, forming neat columns of Greek or Latin script. There were no page numbers, no indexes, no chapter breaks like we have today. The text was a continuous block of letters, and it was the scribe's skill that made it legible and preserved it for the next generation. As they finished a section, you'd hear the soft, distinctive rustle of the papyrus being rolled up on one side and unrolled on the other. It was a delicate dance, a careful manipulation of this precious material. Now, why was papyrus so dominant? Well, for one, it was relatively lightweight and could be rolled up, making it far more portable than clay tablets or stone inscriptions. You could create incredibly long documents. A single roll could contain an entire book of the Iliad. When you wanted to store multiple books, you'd stack these rolls in pigeonhole-like shelves called nidi or feruli. Each roll would have a small tag, a syllabus, hanging from its end, indicating the title and author. This was the ancient card catalog. This system allowed for the creation of colossal collections of knowledge. And this brings us to the great libraries of the ancient world, places that were more like research universities than simple book repositories. The Library of Alexandria in Egypt and the Library of Pergamon in modern-day Turkey were legendary. We're talking about institutions that aimed to collect all the world's knowledge under one roof. They held hundreds of thousands of papyrus rolls. These weren't just dusty archives. They were vibrant centers of scholarship. Scholars from across the Mediterranean would gather there to study, debate, and of course, write even more, adding to the ever-growing collection. The backbone of these magnificent institutions, the very substance that held the epic poems of Homer, the philosophical dialogues of Plato, and the detailed histories of Herodotus, was the humble yet mighty papyrus roll. The role of the scribe and the medium of papyrus were intrinsically linked to the concept of authorship and the preservation of culture. When a poet composed a new work, it existed only in their mind, or perhaps on a few rough wax tablets, until it was dictated to a scribe and committed to a master papyrus roll. This master copy was incredibly valuable. From it, other scribes would create more copies for sale in bookshops or for distribution to other libraries. However, every time a text was copied by hand, there was a risk of error. A tired scribe might misread a word, skip a line, or even make a correction they thought was necessary. Over centuries of copying, these small changes could add up, which is why modern scholars spend so much time comparing different ancient manuscripts to try and reconstruct the most authentic version of a text. The economy around papyrus was also huge. Papyrus reeds grew almost exclusively in the Nile Delta in Egypt, giving the Egyptians a virtual monopoly on this essential resource. They exported it across the entire Mediterranean, and its price could fluctuate based on harvests and political stability. It was a valuable commodity, the engine of the ancient information age. Wars were chronicled on it, laws were published on it, and the stories that still captivate us today were preserved on its fibrous, reed-based pages. It was more than just a writing surface. It was the tangible link to the past, the medium through which the voices of ancient thinkers and storytellers could echo through millennia. So the next time you pick up a book or scroll through a digital article, take a moment to remember its ancestor, the papyrus roll. Think of the dedicated scribe, the scratch of their pen, and the monumental effort it took to preserve and share knowledge in a world without printing presses or digital files. It was this combination of material and human skill that formed the core of the classical world's intellectual heritage, ensuring that the wisdom of the ancients wasn't lost to the sands of time. Now, we're moving into the classical world to meet an instrument They brought both speed and elegance to the written word, the reed pen. So picture this. You're a scribe in ancient Greece or Rome. The world is bustling with new ideas, philosophy, and literature. You need a tool that can keep up, something more precise than what came before. Enter the reed pen. This wasn't just any old piece of plant. It was a carefully selected piece of reed, often from the banks of a river, that was expertly crafted. The real magic happened at the tip. Scribes would meticulously cut the reed to a very sharp, fine point, and then slice a tiny slit down the middle. This slit was a game changer. It acted as a small reservoir for ink, allowing it to flow smoothly and consistently onto the papyrus or parchment. Imagine the sound, a crisp, rhythmic scratching as the pen glides across the surface. That sound was the soundtrack to the creation of epic poems, historical records, and personal letters. Unlike the earlier, more cumbersome tools, the reed pen allowed for a new level of detail. The lines could be incredibly fine, enabling scribes to develop more intricate and flowing letter forms. This is where we start to see the emergence of the beautiful cursive scripts that we associate with the classical period. Think of those elegant, connected letters flowing across the page. That was all made possible by the precision of the reed pen. But it wasn't a set-it-and-forget-it kind of tool. A scribe's relationship with their pen was personal. They had to be skilled not just in writing, but in pen-making and maintenance. The tip would wear down with use, so they constantly had to resharpen it with a small knife, a process known as mending the pen. Each scribe would have their own preference for the sharpness and flexibility of the point, tailoring the tool to their specific hand and writing style. This level of craftsmanship meant that a good scribe was also a good artisan. The quality of their pen directly impacted the quality and efficiency of their work. This innovation was more than just a new gadget. It fundamentally changed communication. With the ability to write faster and more clearly, information could be recorded and shared more efficiently than ever before. Think about the sheer volume of texts produced during this era, from Roman legal documents to Greek philosophical treatises. The reed pen was the engine driving this explosion of knowledge. It facilitated not just the practical recording of information, but also the development of writing as an art form. The balance between functionality and aesthetic beauty was perfectly captured in this simple, yet brilliant, tool. It bridged the gap between purely functional mark-making and the art of calligraphy. The legacy of the reed pen is immense. For over 1,000 years, it was the primary writing instrument across Europe and the Middle East. Its design principles, especially the split nib, directly influenced the development of the quill pen, which would dominate for another millennium, and eventually the metal nibs we see in modern fountain pens. So the next time you pick up a pen, take a moment to appreciate its ancient ancestor. That humble piece of reed, sharpened to a point, was a critical step in our journey to the instant communication we have today. It represents a leap in human ingenuity, a tool that allowed thoughts to flow onto the page with unprecedented grace and speed. What an incredible piece of technology, right? It really shows how even the simplest innovations can have a massive impact on history. Now, we're diving into a pivotal moment in book history, the rise of parchment, and the invention of the codex, the direct ancestor of the book you hold in your hands today. Imagine living in a world where the primary writing material, papyrus, is becoming harder to get, more expensive, or simply not lasting as long as you'd like. Civilizations needed a more durable, more reliable alternative, and they found it in a rather unexpected place, the farm. The solution was parchment, a remarkable material made from processed animal skin, usually from sheep, goats, or calves. This wasn't just a simple case of using leather. Preparing parchment was an art form in itself, a laborious and highly skilled craft. First, the animal hide had to be meticulously cleaned to remove all the hair and flesh. Then it was soaked in a lime solution, a process that helped to purify and preserve the skin. After soaking, the real work began. The hide was stretched taut on a large wooden frame, like a drum. While stretched, scribes or specialized artisans would use a curved blade, called a lunellum, to scrape the surface of the skin. This scraping process had to be done with incredible precision. Scrape too little, and the surface would be greasy and uneven, making it impossible to write on. Scrape too much, and you'd create a hole, ruining the entire sheet. The goal was to create a perfectly smooth, thin, and uniform surface. Once scraped and thinned, the parchment was left to dry under tension, which helped to align the fibers of the skin, creating a strong, stable, and incredibly resilient writing material. The result was a beautiful, creamy, and almost velvety sheet. It was far more durable than papyrus. It could withstand moisture better, it was less likely to tear, and it had one game-changing advantage. You could write on both sides. This ability to use both sides of the page, known as recto and verso, was a crucial innovation that paved the way for a revolutionary new format. Enter the codex. For centuries, texts were kept on long scrolls. To find a specific passage, you had to unroll the entire thing, sometimes up to 30 feet or more. It was clumsy for reference and difficult to navigate. The codex changed everything. Instead of being rolled, the prepared sheets of parchment were folded, stacked together, and then sewn along one edge, just like a modern book. The word codex actually comes from the Latin word codex, meaning the trunk of a tree or a block of wood, because early codices often had protective wooden covers. Suddenly, readers could flip through pages with ease. Imagine the sound, that soft, satisfying thump as the thick, heavy parchment pages were turned. For the first time, you could jump to a specific section, compare passages from different parts of the text, or use bookmarks. It was a revolution in how information was stored, accessed, and organized. This shift from scroll to codex wasn't just a matter of convenience. It fundamentally transformed the act of reading itself. It made cross-referencing possible, which was a massive boon for scholars, lawyers, and theologians. The Christian Church, in particular, was an early and enthusiastic adopter of the codex format. Its portability and ease of reference made it ideal for missionaries and for use in services. While the scroll remained popular for literary and official documents in the Roman Empire for some time, the codex quickly became the preferred format for religious texts, legal codes, and scholarly works. Think about the impact. The codex made knowledge more accessible and easier to manage. It allowed for the creation of larger compilations of texts in a single volume, the first encyclopedias, the first collected works. The format encouraged new ways of thinking and organizing information. You could have a table of contents, an index, page numbers, all features we take for granted today, but which were revolutionary concepts made possible by the codex. The tools of the scribe also evolved. The sturdy surface of parchment could handle more robust inks and allowed for more elaborate illustrations. This led to the flourishing of illuminated manuscripts, where texts were adorned with intricate designs, gold leaf, and beautiful miniature paintings. The book was no longer just a container for words. It was becoming a work of art in its own right, a testament to the value placed on the knowledge it held. So the next time you pick up a book, take a moment to appreciate its ancient lineage. The simple act of flipping through its pages connects you directly to this incredible period of innovation. The transition from the fragile papyrus scroll to the durable parchment codex wasn't just a change in materials. It was a fundamental shift that shaped the future of reading, learning, and the preservation of human knowledge for millennia to come. It laid the groundwork for the libraries, universities, and the entire intellectual world as we know it. All right, let's dive back into the scribe's toolkit, but this time we're getting into the really messy and fascinating stuff. Inks and erasers. It's one thing to have a great pen, but what do you dip it in? And what happens when you, inevitably, make a mistake? This is where the real drama of ancient writing unfolds, the world of permanent marks and second chances. So picture this: a Roman scribe, hunched over a sheet of papyrus or a carefully prepared piece of parchment. Next to them isn't a plastic bottle of ink, but a small, often beautifully crafted inkwell. These weren't just functional. They were often works of art themselves, made of clay, bronze, or even glass. Inside these little pots was the lifeblood of their craft: ink. The most common type of black ink was carbon-based. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of our modern India ink. Scribes would collect soot, the fine black powder left over from burning oil lamps, wood, or resinous pine. They'd mix this soot with a binder, usually gum arabic, which is a hardened sap from the acacia tree. This created a suspension, a liquid that held the tiny carbon particles. Finally, they'd add a bit of water to get the right consistency. When a scribe wrote with this carbon ink, the water would be absorbed into the papyrus or parchment, and the gum arabic would bind the soot particles to the surface. It was simple, effective, and relatively easy to make. This ink was beautifully black, but it had a downside. It wasn't truly permanent. It basically sat on top of the writing surface. If it got wet, it could smudge or even wash away. And as we'll see later, it could also be scraped off, which was both a blessing and a curse. But the Romans and Greeks had another trick up their sleeves for when they needed something more durable, something that would truly stand the test of time. This was iron gall ink. This stuff was a game changer. It was the preferred ink for important legal documents, religious texts, and anything that needed to last for centuries. Making iron gall ink was like a chemistry experiment. The recipe called for two main ingredients: tannic acid and iron salts. The tannic acid was extracted from something called oak galls. You've probably seen them without realizing what they are, those strange round growths on oak trees. They're formed when a gall wasp lays its eggs in the tree's tissue. The tree reacts by creating this growth, which happens to be incredibly rich in tannic acid. Scribes would collect these galls, crush them up, and boil them in water to extract the acid. Next, they needed iron salts, usually iron sulfate, which was also known as copperas or green vitriol. They would mix this with the tannic acid solution. When you first mix them, the liquid is often pale and almost colorless. It's only when the ink is applied to the page and exposed to air that the magic happens. The iron oxidizes, and through a chemical reaction with the tannic acid, it turns into a deep purplish black or brownish black color. Unlike carbon ink, which just sits on the surface, iron gall ink actually bites into the parchment or papyrus. The acid in the ink etches itself into the fibers, creating a permanent bond. This is why so many ancient manuscripts written with iron gall ink have survived so well. The writing is literally part of the page. But this permanence came with its own set of problems. Over centuries, the acidic nature of iron gall ink can actually eat through the parchment. If you look at some medieval manuscripts, you can see places where the ink has literally burned holes right through the page, leaving behind ghostly, brittle letters. It's a powerful reminder that even the most permanent things have a lifespan. So you've got your ink, you're writing away, and then it happens. A slip of the hand, a misremembered word, a sudden splatter from dipping your pen too deep into the inkwell. You can almost hear the scribe muttering under their breath. What do? You can't just hit backspace. This is where the second chances part of our story comes in. The methods of correction were as ingenious as the inks themselves. Let's start with the easiest scenario: writing on a wax tablet. As we've discussed, wax tablets were the scratch pads of the ancient world. If a scribe made a mistake, they didn't need a special eraser. They just used the other end of their stylus, the flat, spatula-like end. They would simply smooth over the wax, erasing the incorrect letter or word, and then write over the smoothed area. It was quick, easy, and endlessly reusable. This is why tablets were perfect for school lessons, drafts, and daily notes. But what about our more permanent materials, papyrus and parchment? This is where things get tricky. Let's say you made a mistake with carbon ink on papyrus. Since the ink mostly sat on the surface, a careful scribe could take a damp sponge or cloth and gently wipe the ink away. You had to be very careful not to damage the delicate papyrus fibers, but it was possible. A more common method for both carbon ink and the more stubborn iron gall ink was abrasion. The scribe would take a small, sharp knife, known as a scalprum or risorium, and very carefully scrape the ink off the surface of the parchment. Parchment, being made of durable animal skin, could handle this better than papyrus. The scribe would hold the knife almost flat against the page and gently shave off the top layer of the parchment, taking the ink with it. After scraping, the area would be a bit rough. To smooth it out and prepare it for rewriting, the scribe would then rub it with a pumice stone. Pumice is a very light, porous volcanic rock that works like a fine grit sandpaper. This would smooth the surface, making it ready to receive new ink. Sometimes they would also apply a bit of chalk or a similar substance to the erased area to help the new ink adhere better and prevent it from bleeding. This process of scraping and smoothing was incredibly time-consuming and required immense skill. If you scraped too hard, you could create a thin spot or even a hole in the valuable parchment. If you look closely at ancient manuscripts today, you can sometimes spot these corrected areas. The parchment might be a little thinner, or the color slightly different. These are called palimpsests manuscripts, where the original text was erased and a new one was written on top. Sometimes, with modern imaging technology, we can actually read the ghost of the original text that was scraped away centuries ago, opening up a hidden library of lost works. This whole process of correction tells us so much about the mindset of the ancient scribe. It shows us the immense value placed on the materials. Parchment was expensive, and you didn't just throw a sheet away because of a typo. It also highlights the dedication to neatness and accuracy. A sloppy manuscript reflected poorly on the scribe and the person who commissioned it. Every letter had to be perfect, and if it wasn't, they had the tools and the patience to fix it. So the next time you effortlessly hit the delete key on your computer or phone, take a moment to think about the Roman scribe with their pot of iron gall ink, their sharp little knife, and their pumice stone. The act of writing was a serious, deliberate craft. Every permanent mark was a commitment, and every correction was a testament to their dedication to getting it right. It was a world of precision, patience, and the art of the second chance. For over 1,000 years, from the fall of Rome well into the Renaissance, this was the king of writing tools. So, what exactly was a quill pen? It started with a feather, but not just any feather would do. Scribes were picky. The best ones came from the outer wing of large birds, like geese, swans, or even crows and ravens. These feathers were strong, flexible, and hollow, making them perfect for holding ink. The word pen itself actually comes from the Latin word penna, which means feather. Kinda cool, right? But finding the right feather was only the first step. The real magic was in the preparation, a skill known as quill cutting. It was a true art form. A scribe would take their feather and first harden it, often by sticking it in hot sand to make it less brittle. Then came the delicate part, using a special, razor-sharp knife called a penknife. Yep, that's where the name comes from. They would carefully shape the tip. They'd slice the end at a sharp angle, then make a tiny, precise slit right down the middle of the point. This slit was the secret sauce. It acted as a tiny channel, allowing ink to flow from the hollow shaft of the feather down to the tip in a controlled, even stream. It's this design that allowed for the beautiful flowing scripts we see in medieval manuscripts. A scribe's penknife was their best friend. The tip of a quill would wear down pretty quickly, especially on the rough surface of parchment, which was made from animal skin. So a scribe had to constantly resharpen or recut their quill to keep the lines crisp and fine. A good scribe could do this in seconds, without even breaking their flow of thought. It was a skill that separated the amateurs from the masters. Why did the quill dominate for so long, for nearly a millennium? Flexibility. Unlike the stiffer reed pens that came before it, the quill's flexible nib allowed for incredible variation in line width. By simply changing the pressure or the angle of the pen, a scribe could create thick, bold downstrokes and thin, delicate upstrokes. This is what gave medieval calligraphy, like the beautiful Gothic or Carolingian scripts, their distinctive character and elegance. The quill wasn't just a tool. It was an extension of the scribe's hand and mind. It captured the thoughts of scholars, the decrees of kings, and the stories of poets. Every illuminated manuscript, every royal charter, every monk's patient copy of the Bible from this era was brought to life by the humble feather. It connected the writer to the page in a very intimate, tactile way. The sound, the feel, the constant maintenance, it was a deep, personal process. Think about it. The entire body of Western knowledge for 1,000 years was recorded and passed down thanks to this simple yet ingenious piece of technology. From the scriptoriums of remote Irish monasteries to the bustling universities of Paris and Bologna, the scratch of the quill was the soundtrack of learning and progress. It truly was the feather of learning, carrying ideas across centuries. So the next time you see a period drama with someone furiously writing a letter, pay attention to that feather in their hand. It's not just a prop. It's a symbol of an entire era of scholarship, art, and communication. A testament to how human ingenuity can take something as simple as a bird, feather, and turn it into a powerful tool for changing the world. Have you ever held a really old book? I don't mean from your grandparents' attic. I'm talking about something truly ancient. If you have, you've probably felt that unique, almost leathery texture of the pages. Chances are, you were touching something far more special than paper. You were touching vellum or parchment. For the medieval world, these weren't just writing materials. They were the sacred canvases upon which knowledge, faith, and art were preserved. Forget your local stationery shop. Creating these pages was a monumental undertaking. It all started with an animal, usually a sheep, goat, or, for the finest quality, a calf. The hide was soaked, scraped clean of all hair and flesh, stretched tight on a wooden frame to dry under tension, and then meticulously polished with pumice stone until it was smooth, creamy, and ready for the scribe's pen. Just imagine that workshop. The distinct smell of lime and wet hide, the rhythmic sound of scraping tools, the sight of ghostly white skins stretched out like sails. This wasn't a quick process. It was a craft passed down through generations, demanding patience, strength, and an incredible eye for detail. The end result was a writing surface that was both incredibly durable and unbelievably beautiful. The finest of these materials was called vellum, made specifically from the skin of young calves. Its surface was so smooth, so flawless, that it became the preferred choice for the most important manuscripts, the ones meant to last for eternity. Vellum had a certain life to it. When you open a heavy vellum manuscript, you can sometimes hear a soft, distinctive creak as the thick pages bend. It's a sound that echoes across centuries. It feels substantial in your hands, each page having a weight and presence that modern paper just can't replicate. This quality, however, came at a staggering cost. Think about it. One large book might require the skins of hundreds of animals. A single complete Bible, for instance, could demand a herd of over 200 calves. This wasn't just about the cost of the animals themselves, but the immense manual labor involved in the transformation. This is why medieval books were priceless treasures. They weren't consumer goods. They were investments, symbols of power, piety, and wealth. Owning a single book, let alone a library, was a privilege reserved for monasteries, royalty, and the ultra-rich. The high cost meant that nothing was wasted. Scribes would write in tiny, compressed scripts to fit as much text as possible onto a single page. Sometimes old texts were even scraped off so the vellum could be reused, creating a fascinating layered document called a palimpsest, where ghosts of the original writing can still be seen under the new. This practice shows us just how precious every single inch of this material was. It was, quite literally, worth more than gold to the people who used it. But vellum wasn't just practical. It was the perfect partner for art. Its non-porous surface was ideal for the vibrant, intricate illuminations that make medieval manuscripts so breathtaking. The paint and gold leaf would sit right on top of the vellum, shining with a brilliance that paper could never achieve. The colors, applied with painstaking care using brushes made from just a few hairs, remained dazzling even after 1,000 years. The vellum absorbed the ink and pigments in a way that made them part of the page itself, ensuring their longevity. This durability is perhaps vellum's greatest legacy. While paper can yellow, crumble, and be destroyed by moisture, vellum and parchment are incredibly resilient. They can withstand the passage of time, humidity, and even fire to a degree that seems almost miraculous. This is why we can still read the words of monks and scholars from the 8th or 9th century. The animal skin they wrote on has acted as a time capsule, safeguarding priceless knowledge, art, and history. These weren't just pages. They were a testament to a different way of thinking about information. In an age before printing, every book was a singular masterpiece, a physical embodiment of immense effort and resources. The very substance of the book, the vellum, was a declaration of its importance. It told the reader, what is written here matters. It is meant to endure. It connected the physical and the spiritual, turning a simple text into a sacred object. So the next time you see a high-resolution image of a medieval manuscript online, like the Book of Kells or the Lindisfarne Gospels, take a moment to look beyond the beautiful script and the glittering gold. Look at the page itself. Appreciate the creamy, slightly imperfect surface. Remember the animal it came from, the craftsman who prepared it, and the scribe who wrote on it. You're looking at vellum, the sacred page that carried the light of knowledge through the dark ages and delivered it, safe and sound, into our hands today. It's a quiet but powerful reminder that the medium is, and always has been, part of the message. Now we're stepping into a world of silent dedication, a place where knowledge was not just read, but painstakingly reborn, one letter at a time. We are entering the medieval Scriptorium. Imagine this. You're walking through the cold stone corridors of a monastery in the 10th century. You push open a heavy oak door, and the first thing that hits you isn't a sight, but a sound. It's a gentle, rhythmic scratching, a symphony of dozens of quills moving across parchment. This is the sound of a scriptorium, the heart of intellectual life in the Middle Ages. The word scriptorium literally means a place for writing. These weren't just rooms. They were sacred workshops, often located next to the monastery's library or church, usually on the sunniest side to maximize the precious daylight. Forget your cozy modern offices. These spaces were often unheated to reduce the risk of fire to the priceless manuscripts. The monks and nuns who worked here endured the cold, their breath misting in the air, their fingers stiff, all for the sake of preserving and creating books. Life in the scriptorium was governed by a strict routine, mirroring the disciplined rhythm of monastic life itself. The day was punctuated by prayers, meals, and the relentless task of copying. Silence was often the rule, a chorale silence, allowing for maximum concentration. Communication might happen through subtle hand gestures. A silent language developed to request more ink or a new piece of vellum without disturbing the profound quiet. This wasn't just a job. It was a form of prayer, a devotional act. Each stroke of the pen was an offering to God. The production of a single manuscript was a true team effort, a medieval assembly line of artistry. First, you had the parchmenter, who prepared the animal skins, usually calf, sheep, or goat, turning them into smooth, durable writing surfaces known as vellum or parchment. This was a smelly, labor-intensive process of scraping, stretching, and treating the skins. Then came the scribe, the central figure in our story. Before even a single word was written, the scribe would rule the page, using a sharp point to create faint, invisible guidelines. This ensured the text was perfectly straight and evenly spaced. Then, with a quill pen, often made from a goose feather, and ink made from ingredients like soot or oak galls, the painstaking work of copying began. The scribe would sit for hours, their eyes moving back and forth between the original text, the exemplar, and their new copy. Accuracy was paramount. An error could corrupt a sacred text for generations. But the work didn't stop with the black ink of the text. Next came the rubricator. The name comes from the Latin rubrica, meaning red ochre. The rubricator was responsible for adding titles, headings, and initial letters in vibrant red ink. This not only made the manuscript more beautiful, but also made it easier to navigate. It was an early form of information design, helping the reader find their way through dense pages of Latin script. And then, for the most luxurious manuscripts, came the illuminator. This was the master artist of the Scriptorium. Using brushes made from squirrel or ermine hair, the illuminator would add intricate decorations, detailed miniatures, and lavish initial letters using paints made from ground minerals and, most dazzling of all, gold leaf. This is where we get the term illuminated manuscript, because the shimmering gold would literally light up the page, reflecting the candlelight and dazzling the eye. These illustrations weren't just pretty pictures. They were visual commentaries, helping to explain the text to a largely illiterate population and adding another layer of devotional beauty. Finally, the finished, decorated pages would go to the bookbinder. The binder would sew the gatherings of pages, called quires, together, and then enclose them between wooden boards, which were often covered in leather, and sometimes even adorned with metalwork, jewels, or carved ivory. What started as animal skin and raw materials was now a complete book, a durable, beautiful object that could last for 1,000 years. Think about the sheer dedication this required. A single large Bible could take a team of scribes and artists years to complete. It was a monumental undertaking, demanding patience, skill, and an unwavering belief in the importance of their work. These monks and nuns weren't just copyists. They were guardians of civilization. During the so-called Dark Ages, a period of social and political upheaval after the fall of the Roman Empire, these scriptoriums became beacons of light. While libraries in the secular world were being neglected or destroyed, monasteries served as repositories of knowledge. Scribes didn't just copy the Bible and theological works. They also preserved the great works of classical antiquity, the philosophy of Plato and Aristotle, the poetry of Virgil, the scientific texts of Ptolemy. Without their tireless efforts, much of the intellectual heritage of the ancient world would have been lost to us forever. They were the bridge connecting the classical world to the Renaissance. The next time you effortlessly type on a keyboard or download a digital book, take a moment to remember the Scriptorium. Remember the cold rooms, the silent focus, and the steady scratch of the quill. The easy access to information we enjoy today is built upon centuries of their quiet, humble, and profoundly important labor. They didn't just copy texts. They preserved the very memory of our civilization. Ever wondered how medieval manuscripts got those stunning, vibrant colors that have lasted for centuries? It's a story that's as much about alchemy and art as it is about writing. Forget the simple black and white of ancient scrolls. The medieval world exploded with color, transforming books into breathtaking works of art. Imagine a scribe's workshop, not just a quiet place for writing, but a bustling laboratory of color. The air would be filled with the earthy scent of ground minerals and the sweet aroma of plant-based dyes. The gentle, rhythmic sound of a pestle grinding against a mortar would be the studio's heartbeat. This was where the magic happened. This was where scribes became artists. Let's start with the everyday hero of the medieval scriptorium, black ink. Most of the text you see in medieval books was written with something called iron gall ink. It sounds a bit strange, but it was a marvel of medieval chemistry. The recipe was ingenious. It started with oak galls, those little woody growths you see on oak trees, caused by insects. These galls are packed with tannins. Scribes would crush these oak galls and soak them in water, or sometimes wine or vinegar, to release the tannic acid. Then they would add something called vitriol, which is iron sulfate. When the iron sulfate mixed with the tannic acid, a chemical reaction occurred, creating a deep purplish-black liquid. Finally, they'd add a binder, usually gum arabic from the acacia tree, to thicken the ink and help it stick to the parchment. The result was a permanent, waterproof ink that would actually ETCH itself into the surface of the page as it oxidized, turning from a pale gray to a rich, velvety black over time. It's so permanent, in fact, that sometimes on damaged manuscripts, the ink is the only thing left, having eaten right through the parchment. But the real showstoppers in illuminated manuscripts were the colors. These weren't just inks. They were paints, meticulously prepared from some of the most exotic and expensive materials available. Let's talk about the king of colors, ultramarine blue. This wasn't just any blue. It was made from lapis lazuli, a semi-precious stone mined almost exclusively in a single region of what is now Afghanistan. Imagine the journey this stone took, traveling thousands of miles along the Silk Road to reach a European monastery. It was more expensive than gold. To turn it into a pigment, the stone had to be ground into a fine powder, an incredibly laborious process. But you couldn't just mix this powder with a binder. The artists had a secret technique. They'd mix the ground lapis with melted wax, resins, and oils, creating a kind of dough. They'd knead this dough in a solution of lye, and the purest, most brilliant blue particles would leach out and settle at the bottom. This process would be repeated multiple times, yielding different grades of blue, with the first extraction being the most vibrant and valuable. This heavenly blue was reserved for the most important figures, like the robes of the Virgin Mary, symbolizing her purity and divinity. Cheaper blues existed, made from minerals like azurite or even plants like woad, but nothing could match the depth and intensity of true ultramarine. Now, for a color that's just as dramatic, red. The most prized red was vermilion. It's a brilliant, fiery scarlet made from the mineral cinnabar, which is a toxic mercury sulfide. Scribes could either grind the natural mineral or create it artificially by heating mercury and sulfur together, dangerous process that released poisonous fumes. This vibrant red was often used for headings, initial letters, and important sections of text. In fact, this is where we get the term rubric, from the Latin word asterisk rubrica asterisk, meaning red ochre. These red markings guided the reader through the text, highlighting key passages and instructions. Another fascinating source of red came from the insect world. Kermes insects, which lived on certain oak trees in the Mediterranean, were harvested, dried, and crushed to produce a beautiful crimson dye. This Kermes lake pigment was a luxurious color, often used in textiles and paintings as a slightly less expensive, but still beautiful alternative to other high-end reds. And what would a medieval manuscript be without the glimmer of gold? Gold leaf was the ultimate symbol of the divine and the sacred. Applying it was a highly skilled art known as gilding. The scribe would first paint the area to be gilded with a base layer, often a sticky mixture called gesso, made from gypsum and animal glue, or a simpler binder like glaire, which is just whisked egg white. This base layer was often built up to give the gold a raised, three-dimensional effect. Then, with incredible precision, the artist would lift a tissue-thin sheet of hammered gold leaf using a special brush. They would hold their breath and gently lay it onto the sticky base. The slightest breeze could ruin the delicate leaf. Once applied, the gold was burnished with a smooth, hard tool, often a polished stone like agate or even a wolf's tooth. This polishing is what gave the gold its brilliant, mirror-like shine, designed to catch the candlelight and make the page seem alive with heavenly light. Silver was also used, but it had a tendency to tarnish and turn black over time, so gold was always the preferred choice for a lasting impression. The palette didn't stop there. Green could be made from the mineral malachite, or from a concoction called verdigris, created by suspending copper plates over vinegar. Yellows came from the saffron crocus or the mineral orpiment, another toxic arsenic-based pigment. Purples, once the exclusive color of Roman emperors, could be made by mixing blues and reds, or from certain lichens. And a humble earthy brown often came from grinding up actual Egyptian mummies, a strange and slightly morbid fact of art history. Each of these pigments had to be mixed with a binder to turn it into paint. The most common binder for manuscript illumination was egg tempera. The artist would separate the yolk from the white and use the yolk as the binding agent. It dried quickly to a durable, matte finish, perfect for the detailed work required in miniatures. Another option was glaire, that whisked egg white I mentioned earlier, which created a more transparent, glossy finish. So, when you look at an illuminated manuscript, you're not just looking at a book. You're looking at a treasure chest of materials from all over the known world. You're seeing the result of dangerous chemistry, painstaking labor, and incredible artistry. Each color tells a story of trade routes, of scientific discovery, and of a deep devotion that sought to make the written word a reflection of the divine. The swish of the pestle, the glint of gold, the rich aroma of pigments, it all came together to create these miniature masterpieces that still inspire awe today. We're pulling back the curtain on the unseen art of manuscript layout, exploring the rulers, punches, and guides that formed the hidden skeleton of every beautiful page. Before a single drop of ink touched the parchment, the scribe or a specialized layout artist would begin the meticulous process of preparing the page. This wasn't a freehand affair. It was a carefully calculated architectural endeavor. The goal was to create a grid, a framework that would guide the text and illustrations, ensuring harmony, legibility, and aesthetic balance. This grid, often invisible to the final reader, was the foundation upon which the entire manuscript was built. It dictated the size of the writing block, the width of the margins, and the number of columns and lines per page. So, how did they create these guidelines? The most common tool was the ruling stylus. Forget your modern graphite pencil. Medieval scribes used a stylus made of a soft metal, typically lead or silver. This tool, often called a plummet if made of lead or silver point, didn't leave a dark, messy line like a pencil. Instead, as it was drawn across the parchment, it left a very faint, silvery gray line. It was just visible enough for the scribe to follow, but subtle enough that it wouldn't distract from the final inked text. Imagine the gentle, whisper-light scrape of the metal stylus against the prepared animal skin, a sound of pure concentration as the page's architecture was carefully mapped out. To ensure these lines were perfectly straight and parallel, a ruler or straightedge was essential. These weren't the plastic rulers we use today. They were typically made of wood or bone, carefully smoothed and straightened. The scribe would place the ruler on the parchment and draw the stylus along its edge to create the horizontal lines for the text known as the ruling, and the vertical lines that define the margins and columns called bounding lines. This process was repeated for every single line on every single page. Think about a 200-page book. That's 400 sides, each requiring dozens of ruled lines. The sheer amount of painstaking preparatory work is mind-boggling. But how did they ensure the lines were in the exact same place on every page? Consistency was key, especially for high-quality manuscripts. This is where a clever technique called pricking comes in. Before ruling, the scribe would take a stack of prepared bifolia the folded sheets of parchment. Using a sharp, pointed tool like an awl or a specialized multi-pronged instrument called a pricking wheel, They would pierce tiny holes along the outer margins of the stacked pages. These small, almost imperceptible holes, known as pricks, served as registration marks. Once the stack was pricked, the scribe could then take each individual sheet, lay it flat, and use these pricks as guide points for their ruler. They would simply align the ruler with the corresponding pricks on opposite sides of the page and draw the line. This ingenious system ensured that the text block would be in the exact same position on every single page of the book, creating a visually uniform and professional-looking final product. If you look very closely at the outer edges of some original medieval manuscripts, you can still find these tiny pricking holes, a silent testament to the scribe's meticulous planning. Now, let's talk about those magnificent ornate initial letters that often begin a chapter or section. Many of these feature perfect circles or elegant curves. Were these drawn freehand? Rarely. For this, the scribe turned to another familiar tool, the compass. Not just for navigation, the compass was a crucial drafting instrument. Usually made of iron or bronze, it consisted of two legs joined by a hinge, one with a sharp point to anchor it to the parchment, and the other designed to hold a piece of lead, or later an ink pen. With the compass, the scribe could draw perfect circles and arcs to form the basis of elaborate initials or decorative elements within the page layout. Picture the scribe carefully setting the compass width, pressing the sharp point into the parchment, sometimes leaving a tiny hole at the center of the circle, and then gracefully sweeping the other arm around to create a flawless curve. This geometric precision provided a strong, controlled foundation for the later artistic flourishes of illumination and decoration. A combination of straight lines from the ruler and perfect curves from the compass created a harmonious and mathematically pleasing page design. These tools, the ruling stylus, the ruler, the pricking awl, and the compass, were the unsung heroes of the Scriptorium. They represent the intellectual side of manuscript production, the geometry, the planning, and the rigorous discipline required before the more celebrated artistic work could even begin. They remind us that a medieval book was not just a collection of words, but a carefully constructed object, designed with an architect's eye for structure and a mathematician's appreciation for proportion. The crisp columns, the even lines of text, and the balanced white space of the margins were no accident. They were the direct result of these preparatory tools and the painstaking hours spent using them. The faint gray lines of the plummet, the tiny pinpricks in the margins, the almost invisible center point of a compass arc. These are the ghosts in the machine, the hidden framework that gives the manuscript its strength and beauty. They reveal a deep respect for order and a desire for perfection that defined the medieval craftsman as mindset. It was a world where precision was a form of devotion, and every line, seen or unseen, was drawn with purpose. So the next time you marvel at a beautifully preserved medieval manuscript, take a moment to look beyond the vibrant illuminations and the elegant script. Try to imagine the invisible grid beneath it all. Hear the faint scrape of the silver point stylus and the precise click of the compass. Appreciate the hidden labor that transformed a simple sheet of animal skin into a perfectly ordered canvas for knowledge and art. The true beauty of these books lies not just in what you see, but in the incredible, unseen precision that holds it all together. We travel to ancient China, where a single tool didn't just write words, but transformed them into breathtaking art. I'm talking about the Chinese writing brush, the asterisk Mao Bian asterisk. Imagine holding this elegant instrument. A slender handle, often crafted from bamboo, balances perfectly in your hand. At its tip, a soft tuft of animal hair, maybe from a goat for broad, flowing strokes, or a weasel for sharp, precise lines. This isn't just a pen. It's an extension of the artist's soul. Listen closely. Can you hear it? That soft, satisfying swish of the brush, gliding across silk or delicate rice paper. It's the sound of creation. With each movement, a character is born. In Chinese calligraphy, these characters aren't just letters. They are pictures, ideas, and emotions, all captured in a single fluid gesture. It's a dance between ink and paper, where a simple line can convey strength, grace, or sorrow. This reverence for writing is deeply embedded in Chinese culture. The brush is one of the legendary four treasures of the study, or *Wen Fang Si Bao *. Alongside it are the inkstick, the paper, and the inkstone. Together, they form the essential toolkit for any scholar or artist. Grinding the inkstick against the inkstone with water was a meditative ritual in itself, a moment to gather one's thoughts before the brush even touched the paper. It was about preparing the mind as much as the materials. Think about the skill involved. A master calligrapher spends a lifetime perfecting their craft. It's a discipline that requires immense control, patience, and a deep understanding of balance and form. Every stroke has a name and a specific technique. A downward stroke, a delicate flick, a broad sweep, each one is practiced thousands of times. Yet, within this strict discipline, there is incredible freedom for personal expression. The way a calligrapher varies the pressure, the speed, and the amount of ink makes their work uniquely their own. It's their signature, their voice, their spirit, all visible in the lines they create. Calligraphy wasn't just about writing beautifully. It was seen as a path to self-cultivation, a way to train the mind and discipline the character. It was considered one of the highest art forms, right alongside painting. In fact, calligraphy and painting are often seen as sister arts, sharing the same tools and techniques. A beautifully written poem could be as prized as a magnificent landscape painting. Emperors, scholars, and poets were all judged by the quality of their brushwork. It was a reflection of their inner cultivation and education. Imagine a scholar sitting in a quiet study, surrounded by books and scrolls. The scent of ink fills the air. They dip their brush, pause for a moment of contemplation, and then, with a confident and practiced hand, they begin to write. The characters flow from the brush, sometimes bold and powerful, other times light and ethereal. This wasn't just communication. It was a performance, a meditation, a form of personal expression that has captivated people for thousands of years. The legacy of the writing brush is a testament to how a simple tool can unlock a world of artistic and spiritual depth. It reminds us that writing can be so much more than just putting words on a page. It can be a beautiful expression of our shared humanity. Imagine, for a moment, you're a scribe in the Qin or Han dynasty. Your tools aren't a keyboard or a pen. They're a brush, ink, and your canvas. It could be a series of carefully prepared bamboo slips. Before the invention of paper as we know it, bamboo was the workhorse of the written word. Show an animation or B-roll of someone preparing bamboo slips, cutting, drying, and tying them together. The process was painstaking. Bamboo stalks were cut into individual strips, often the length of a chopstick or longer. These were then scraped clean and dried over a fire in a process called shacking, or killing the green. This crucial step prevented decay and made the surface smooth enough for writing. Once dried, these slips were strung together with silk or hemp cords, forming a CE, which we would now call a scroll. Host holds up a replica of a bamboo scroll and unrolls it. Can you hear that? Host rustles the bamboo slips. That's the sound of history. This rustle is the sound of imperial edicts, philosophical debates, and the very first encyclopedias being read and recorded. The vertical format of the bamboo slips naturally led to the Chinese tradition of writing in columns, from top to bottom and from right to left. Think about the sheer volume of these scrolls. The first emperor, Qin Shi Huang, was said to review over 120 pounds of government documents on bamboo slips every single day. This was the dawn of the imperial archive, a systematic way to store vast amounts of information. It was heavy, it was cumbersome, but it was effective. It allowed for the standardization of texts and the centralization of knowledge under imperial control. transitioned to visuals of luxurious silk textiles and elegant calligraphy on silk. But bamboo wasn't the only player in town. For more refined, important, or artistic works, there was a far more luxurious option: silk. If bamboo was the sturdy workhorse, silk was the elegant thoroughbred. Writing on silk was a completely different experience. Imagine the brush, loaded with rich, black ink, gliding almost silently across a smooth, tightly woven surface. There's no resistance, no texture of wood grain, just a seamless flow of ink onto fabric. Show close-ups of a brush painting on silk, highlighting the fluid movements. This smooth surface allowed for incredible artistic expression. The strokes could be more fluid, more varied, and more nuanced. The very way the brush moved was dictated by the material. On bamboo, the strokes had to be more controlled and deliberate. On silk, the artist could achieve a level of grace and dynamism that was simply not possible on bamboo. This is where we see calligraphy truly begin to flourish as a high art form. Of course, silk was incredibly expensive. It was reserved for imperial decrees, important maps, religious scriptures, and the works of the most celebrated poets and artists. Having your work written on silk was a sign of immense prestige. It was the ancient equivalent of a first edition, leather-bound book. Visuals shift to show the evolution from bamboo and silk to early paper. So we have bamboo for everyday records and vast archives, and silk for high-end literary and artistic works. These two materials dominated Chinese writing for centuries, but they both had their drawbacks. Bamboo was heavy and bulky, and silk was prohibitively expensive. The world was waiting for a new material, something that combined the affordability of bamboo with the lightness and smooth surface of silk. And then it happened. A revolution that would change not just China, but the entire world. Legend credits a court official named Sai Lun, around 105 AD, with perfecting the process of papermaking. Show an animation of the traditional papermaking process: pulping mulberry bark, hemp, and old rags, pressing and drying. Using materials like mulberry bark, hemp fibers, and old fishing nets, a pulp was created, spread thinly on a screen, pressed and dried. The result was a material that was light, cheap, and wonderfully absorbent. Paper was the great equalizer. Suddenly, writing was no longer the exclusive domain of government officials and wealthy aristocrats. It became accessible. Knowledge could be copied and disseminated more widely and quickly than ever before. This invention fueled a surge in literacy, education, and philosophical thought. It allowed for the creation of massive libraries and the widespread printing of books that would come centuries later. The legacy of these flexible surfaces is profound. The vertical columns of bamboo scrolls established the layout of Chinese text. The smooth glide of the brush on silk refined the art of calligraphy. And the invention of paper made all of this knowledge accessible to a much broader audience. The very shape and flow of Chinese characters are a direct result of the materials they were first written on. The tools we use don't just record our thoughts. They actively shape them. The fluid, expressive nature of the Chinese brush, honed on bamboo and silk, has influenced East Asian aesthetics for millennia, from painting to poetry. Host is back on screen, smiling. From the humble bamboo slip to the world-changing invention of paper, the story of these flexible surfaces is a story of innovation and access. It's a testament to the human drive to record, to share, and to create. We're venturing into the sun-drenched landscapes of ancient India and Southeast Asia to uncover a truly remarkable method of preserving knowledge. Forget paper and pens as we know them. We're talking about something far more organic and intricate: palm leaves and metal stelae. For centuries, before paper became widespread in the region, the processed leaves of the palmyra or talipad palm were the primary medium for writing. It was an art form in itself. The process began with harvesting the leaves, boiling them, and then drying them in the shade. Each leaf was carefully cut to a uniform size and polished smooth, creating a durable, flexible surface ready to receive a scribe's wisdom. This wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a handcrafted canvas, prepared with patience and respect. Now, you couldn't just write on these leaves with a regular ink pen. The surface was too smooth and non-absorbent. Instead, scribes used a tool that was part pen, part engraver, the stylus. Known as a lekani or salaka in various languages, this was a sharp, pointed iron instrument, sometimes with an ornate handle, held much like we hold a pen today. Writing wasn't about applying ink. It was about physically incising the characters into the fibrous surface of the leaf. Picture a scribe, perhaps sitting cross-legged in the quiet of a monastery library. With immense concentration and a steady hand, they would press the sharp tip of the stylus into the palm leaf, carefully carving every single letter of a sacred text or a piece of epic poetry. The only sound would be the gentle, rhythmic scratching of metal on leaf, a sound that, for thousands of years, was the sound of knowledge being recorded for posterity. It required incredible skill. The pressure had to be just right too soft, and the line wouldn't be deep enough. Too hard, and you could split the delicate leaf. But if you looked at the leaf right after the scribe was finished, you'd barely be able to see the writing. The incisions were there, but they were faint, almost invisible. So, how did they make the text legible? This is where the magic happens. The scribe would take a natural pigment, often a mixture of soot, charcoal powder, or a specific plant resin, and rub it all over the surface of the leaf. This dark powder would fill the tiny grooves and scratches they had just made. Then, with a soft cloth, they would wipe the excess pigment away. The smooth, polished surface of the leaf would come clean, but the ink would remain lodged in the engraved lines, revealing the text in stark, beautiful contrast. It's a brilliant two-step process, a fusion of engraving and inking. The result was a permanent record, resistant to fading and the effects of the humid climate. Once a series of leaves was inscribed, creating a full manuscript or pothy, they needed to be kept in order. Scribes would drill one, or sometimes two holes, through the stack of finished leaves. A string was then threaded through the holes, binding the individual leaves together into a single volume. This cord also allowed the reader to flip through the leaves without mixing them up. To protect the delicate manuscript, it was often sandwiched between two decorative wooden boards, which served as a cover. These covers were sometimes beautifully carved or painted, signaling the importance of the text held within. This method was used to preserve some of the most important works in human history, from the Vedas and the Upanishads to Buddhist scriptures and epic tales like the Ramayana and Mahabharata. These palm leaf manuscripts became treasured possessions, passed down through generations of scholars and monks. They were repositories of science, medicine, astrology, and law. When you see one of these ancient manuscripts in a museum today, you're not just looking at old writing. You're looking at a testament to human ingenuity, a physical link to the voices and ideas of a distant past. The skill of the scribe, the preparation of the leaf, the precision of the stylus, and the final inking every step was a deliberate act of creation and preservation. It shows us that the drive to record our stories and our discoveries is a universal human impulse, and the methods we've developed to do so are as diverse and fascinating as the cultures that created them. Thank you so much for joining me on this exploration of palm leaf manuscripts. We've looked at so many fascinating objects throughout this series, but what does it all mean? What is their ultimate impact on us today? When you think about it, these instruments were so much more than just simple, forgotten daily tools. They were the bridge between thought and permanence, the physical connection between an idea and the page, tablet, or scroll. Imagine that first Sumerian scribe pressing a simple reed stylus into wet clay. With that one small act, they weren't just making marks. They were creating a record. They were capturing a transaction, a law, or a story for the very first time allowing it to exist beyond the fleeting memory of a single person. That stylus, in its humble way, was an extension of the human mind itself. It was a key that unlocked our ability to build complex societies. From that simple wedge-shaped mark of cuneiform, a revolution was born. Suddenly, knowledge could be accumulated, stored, and passed down through generations. Think of the vast libraries of Alexandria, filled with papyrus scrolls carefully inscribed by Egyptian scribes. These weren't just warehouses of paper. They were repositories of science, philosophy, and literature. They were the foundation upon which empires like Rome administered their vast territories, sending orders and decrees across thousands of miles. Without these tools, the reed pen, the ink, the papyrus, none of that would have been possible. The meticulous records kept by these scribes allowed for the organization of armies, the collection of taxes, and the establishment of legal systems that still influence our own today. And it wasn't just about administration or the practicalities of running an empire. These tools gave voice to the deepest parts of the human spirit. Consider the elegant dance of a brush in the hand of a Chinese calligrapher. Each stroke, each character, was not just a word, but a piece of art, a reflection of harmony and balance. The act of writing was a form of meditation, a spiritual practice. This is where we see the profound connection between the tool and the soul. The brush wasn't just an implement for applying ink. It was a conduit for expressing profound philosophical and spiritual beliefs, capturing the essence of Taoism and Confucianism in a way that mere spoken words never could. Similarly, think of the medieval monk, painstakingly scraping and preparing a piece of vellum, mixing his own inks from crushed minerals and plants. He would then spend months, even years, copying a single sacred text with a carefully cut quill. For him, this was an act of devotion. The tool was not separate from the message. It was part of the worship. The illuminated manuscripts they created are not just books. They are sacred objects, glowing with gold leaf and vibrant colors, testaments to a faith that believed the Word of God deserved the most beautiful physical form imaginable. Each letter was a prayer, and the quill was the instrument that carried it from the heart to the page. What's truly amazing is how this story unfolds across every culture, on every continent. From the knotted strings of the quipu in the Andes, which recorded complex data for the Inca Empire, to the intricate symbols carved into Mayan stele, humanity has always been driven by a universal need to record, to communicate, and to transmit our knowledge to the future. It's a fundamental part of who we are. We want to be remembered. We want our stories to survive us. And the tools that made this possible were often incredibly simple, crafted from the materials at hand: a reed from the riverbank, a bird's feather, a piece of burnt wood, or a sharpened bit of bone. They weren't complicated machines. They were humble, everyday objects. Yet, in their simplicity, they held a power that would reshape the world. They democratized knowledge, bit by bit. They allowed ideas to travel further and faster than any army. They built civilizations, recorded our greatest triumphs and our deepest sorrows, and preserved the wisdom that defines our understanding of the ancient world. Every story you've ever read, every law that governs your life, every piece of philosophical wisdom that has ever given you comfort, it all traces its lineage back to these humble beginnings. It all started with a person, a tool, and the desire to make a mark that would last. These tools are the true unsung heroes of our shared human story. They are the silent partners behind every word ever written, the physical embodiment of our collective memory. They may seem forgotten, but their legacy is written all around us. It's in the books on our shelves, the words on our screens, and the very structure of our society. So the next time you pick up a pen or type on a keyboard, take a moment to think about the long, incredible history that led to that simple act. You are participating in a tradition that is thousands of years old, connecting you directly to that first scribe pressing a stylus into clay. You are carrying on the legacy of those who used these simple tools to build the world we live in today. So here we are, at the end of our journey through the world of forgotten daily tools. We've traveled across continents and millennia, from the marshy banks of the Nile to the bustling markets of ancient Rome, from the serene monasteries of medieval Europe to the imperial courts of China. We've unearthed the stories behind the humble tools that, quite literally, wrote history. Think about it for a moment. Every epic poem, every legal code, every merchant's ledger, every love letter that has survived from the ancient world was brought into existence by one of these simple instruments. A piece of reed, a sharpened quill, a stick of metal, a delicate brush. They seem so insignificant, don't they? But in the hands of our ancestors, they became conduits for civilization itself. Let's go back to Mesopotamia, where it all began. Picture a scribe pressing a simple stylus carved from a reed into a soft clay tablet. That wedge-shaped mark, the cuneiform impression, was more than just a symbol. It was a revolution. It was the birth of accounting, the foundation of law, the first time a story could outlive its storyteller. This wasn't just writing, it was permanence. The stylus didn't just create a mark. It created a record, an empire's memory held fast in baked clay. From Hammurabi's Code to the Epic of Gilgamesh, these stories survived because a simple three-sided tool gave them a physical form. Then we journey to ancient Egypt, where the landscape itself provided the tools for eternity. The rush pen, the asterisk Juncus Maritimus asterisk, dipped in soot and gum ink, danced across sheets of papyrus. The motion was fluid, graceful, a world away from the forceful pressing of the stylus. With this elegant tool, scribes recorded the deeds of pharaohs, detailed complex religious rituals in the Book of the Dead, and managed the logistics of a vast agricultural empire. The pen and papyrus were more than just a writing system. They were a technology of power. They allowed for a centralized administration that could manage resources, collect taxes, and build monuments that still touch the sky. The pyramids are wonders of engineering, but the papyrus scrolls that organize their construction are the silent wonders of administration. As empires rose and fell, the tools evolved. The Romans, practical and efficient, embraced the metal stylus and the wax tablet. Think of a Roman schoolchild learning their letters, or a senator jotting down notes for a speech. The beauty of the wax tablet was its impermanence. You could write, erase, and write again. It was the ancient world's erasable whiteboard, perfect for drafting, for calculations, for messages that needed to be quick and temporary. But for their lasting works, for Virgil's Aeneid and the letters of Cicero, they turned to the reed pen and later the quill, writing on parchment animal skin that was durable, resilient, and built to last. The very medium and tool spoke of their ambition, to create an empire and a culture that would endure for ages. And what about the quill? For over 1,000 years, from the fall of Rome to the dawn of the Industrial Revolution, the feather of a goose, swan, or crow was the premier writing instrument of the Western world. Imagine a monk in a cold, candle-lit scriptorium, painstakingly copying a manuscript. Each stroke of the quill was an act of devotion, of preservation. Without these scribes and their feathered pens, the knowledge of Greece and Rome philosophy, science, literature might have been lost forever. The quill penned the Magna Carta, Shakespeare's plays, the Declaration of Independence. It was the tool that shaped the medieval and early modern mind. Learning to cut a quill was a skill in itself, a personal craft that connected the writer intimately with their words. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, a completely different tradition was flourishing in China. Here, the four treasures of the study, the brush, the ink, the paper, and the inkstone, were not just tools, but objects of reverence and art. The brush, made from animal hair, was an extension of the artist's and scholar's very being. Unlike the rigid pens of the West, the brush was soft, supple, and expressive. It could create a bold, powerful stroke or a delicate, whisper-thin line. Writing or calligraphy was not merely about conveying information. It was the highest art form, a reflection of one's character, spirit, and harmony with the universe. The brush didn't just write characters, it painted ideas. It captured the essence of poetry, the wisdom of philosophy, and the beauty of nature in a way that was profoundly spiritual. What connects all of these incredible tools? The stylus, the reed pen, the quill, the brush? It's the universal human drive to communicate, to record, to remember. The desire to leave a mark, to say, I was here. This is what I thought. This is what we achieved. These instruments were not just passive implements. They were active partners in the creation of knowledge. They were the bridge between the mind and the page, between a fleeting thought and an enduring legacy. The shape of the tool influenced the shape of the letters. The resistance of the medium dictated the speed of the hand. The technology of writing shaped the very structure of thought and society. Fast, erasable writing on wax tablets encouraged quick notes and drafts. Slower, permanent writing on parchment encouraged careful, considered composition. The fluid brushwork of Chinese calligraphy mirrored a philosophical emphasis on flow and balance. Today, we type on keyboards and tap on glass screens. Our writing is faster, more ephemeral, stored in clouds of data. It's easy to forget the physical effort, the craftsmanship, the sheer ingenuity that went into every single word written for most of human history. But the legacy of these forgotten tools is all around us. It's in the shape of the letters on this screen, in the laws that govern our societies, in the stories that define our cultures, and in the wisdom that has been passed down through generations. These humble tools, a piece of reed, a bird's feather, a tuft of animal hair, are the true, unsung heroes of our collective story. They were the instruments that allowed us to conquer our greatest foe, forgetfulness. They gave humanity a memory. They took our voices, our ideas, and our dreams, and they made them immortal. They are the silent architects of the written world. What a journey it has been. Over the past several weeks, we've traveled across continents and millennia, uncovering the stories behind the very instruments that wrote history. We started our adventure in the Fertile Crescent, in ancient Mesopotamia, where we saw how a simple reed stylus pressed into wet clay gave birth to cuneiform, one of the earliest forms of writing. These wedge-shaped marks, created with such a basic tool, were used to record everything from grain inventories to epic poems like the Tale of Gilgamesh. It was a powerful reminder that the most profound innovations often begin with the humblest of origins. From there, we journeyed to the banks of the Nile, into the world of ancient Egypt. Here, the papyrus scroll reigned supreme, and the scribe's essential tool was the rush pen. We learned how these scribes would chew the end of a rush stalk to fray it into a brush-like tip, perfect for applying ink to the delicate surface of papyrus. The hieroglyphs they painted weren't just writing. They were art, a sacred language that adorned temple walls and filled the scrolls of the Book of the Dead. We saw how the tool itself, its flexibility, its ability to hold ink directly influenced the fluid, pictorial nature of their script. It wasn't just about recording information. It was about capturing the divine. Our path then led us to the Greco-Roman world, a civilization built on philosophy, law, and literature. Here we encountered the reed pen, or asterisk calamus asterisk, and the wax tablet with its pointed asterisk stylus asterisk. Imagine a Roman student learning their letters, scratching into a layer of beeswax, able to erase their mistakes with the flat end of the stylus. This was the notepad of the ancient world, used for everything from drafting speeches to sending personal letters. For more permanent records, the reed pen, sharpened to a fine point, became the instrument of choice for creating the beautiful flowing scripts of Greek and Latin on papyrus and later parchment. Next, we sailed eastward to the vast and ancient empire of China. The tools here were completely different, yet equally ingenious. The four treasures of the study. We explored the delicate dance of the brush, made from animal hair, as it moved across paper or silk. We learned about the inkstick, ground with water on an inkstone to create the perfect consistency of ink, a meditative process in itself. The Chinese brush wasn't just for writing characters. It was for expressing emotion and capturing the essence of nature in calligraphy and painting. The very act of writing became a spiritual and artistic discipline, a philosophy embodied in the soft touch of the brush and the deep black of the ink. The connection between the scribe and their tools was profound, almost symbiotic. Our travels then took us to the Indian subcontinent, a land of diverse languages and scripts. We were fascinated by the palm leaf manuscript tradition and the unique tool used to create them, the sharp metal stylus. Scribes would painstakingly etch letters into the dried surface of palm leaves. To make the writing visible, they would rub a mixture of soot and oil over the leaf, which would fill the inscribed grooves. This method required incredible precision and a steady hand. The tool's sharp, incisive nature led to the development of scripts with many curved lines, which were less likely to split the fragile leaf. It is a brilliant example of how the medium and the tool work together to shape the very form of the letters we see. Finally, we arrived in medieval Europe, a time when monasteries became the great repositories of knowledge. Here, we discovered the iconic quill pen. We saw how monks and scribes would carefully select a flight feather from a goose or swan, cure it, and then cut a precise nib with a penknife. This simple yet versatile tool dominated European writing for over 1,000 years. It allowed for the creation of everything from the bold, angular strokes of Gothic script to the elegant, flowing lines of Carolingian minuscule. The quill gave the scribe unprecedented control over the thickness of the line, enabling the creation of the breathtaking illuminated manuscripts that are among the greatest artistic treasures of the medieval period. Each manuscript was a testament to the scribe's patience, skill, and the remarkable capability of a simple feather. As we look back on this entire series, one central truth becomes incredibly clear. The story of ancient writing is as much about the instruments as it is about the words themselves. The clay stylus, the rush pen, the wax tablet, the Chinese brush, the Indian engraver, the European quill, these weren't just passive objects. They were active participants in the creation of knowledge. Each tool had its own personality, its own demands, its own unique potential. It dictated a certain posture, a particular grip, a specific rhythm. It shaped the very look and feel of the script. These tools were extensions of the human mind and the human hand. They were the conduits through which thoughts, laws, poems, and histories flowed from the abstract realm of the mind onto a physical surface, granting them permanence and power. Think about it. Behind every ancient text we study, every sacred scroll we revere, every historical decree that shaped a nation, there was a person, an individual scribe, sitting with their tools, meticulously working day after day. Theirs was often an anonymous labor, yet it was this dedication, this mastery of their craft, that built the foundation of our entire civilization. The ink-stained fingers of a medieval monk, the steady hand of an Egyptian scribe, the focused gaze of a Chinese calligrapher, these are the unsung heroes of history. Their legacy is not carved in stone monuments, but in the very words we read, the very ideas we inherit. They preserved the knowledge of the past, allowing it to be transmitted across generations, so that we, centuries later, could learn from it, be inspired by it, and build upon it. The history we have today is a direct result of their work with these ingenious and often forgotten daily tools. Thank you so much for joining us on this incredible journey through ink and quill. It has been a privilege to explore this fascinating corner of history with all of you. Your comments, your questions, and your enthusiasm have made this series truly special. If you've been captivated by the ingenuity of these ancient scribes and their tools, please show your support by liking this video and sharing it with anyone else who loves to dive deep into the past. And of course, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next historical adventure. Until next time, stay curious.